16 Delta Force operators, 5,000 Roman Legionaires. No helicopters, no siege engines, just men, weapons, and the fight of a lifetime. But what happens when the bullets run out? Josh here, and on today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're asking what if a single modern Delta Force squad fought an entire Roman legion? Scenario 1. The first time a Roman legionnaire watches his neighbor's head turn into mom's spaghetti from 1,300 feet, with no arrow, no sling stone, and no visible cause, even the most disciplined Roman soldiers would lose it. An enemy that can't make sense of what's happening stops being an army. Delta Force exploits that immediately, but a 10-second route doesn't make a good video. So let's just say infographics have broken every rule of time travel. The Romans have been briefed, the Romans understand guns exist, they're not gonna break. The fighting actually starts, and now things get complicated. Scenario 2. So let's dump those 16 Delta Force operators back onto the field. These aren't guys who came to make up the numbers. They're some of the most elite soldiers on the planet, trained to operate in total darkness, foreign countries, and impossible situations. Each carries an HK-416 assault rifle, firing 5.56mm NATO rounds, effective range around 985 to 1,500 feet. Rate of fire up to 850 rounds per minute on full auto. No professional soldier in Delta would spray full auto into a formed line. They would run dry in 3 seconds, so let's forget about that. They also have sidearms, grenades, possibly a squad automatic weapon or marksman rifle. Across the whole team, that's around 3,400 to 4,800 rounds in total. A massive amount of firepower, but finite. Across the field, the Romans are bringing a lot more than just swords and sandals to the party. Each legionnaire has a scutum, 2 pila, and a gladius, also drilled in formation for decades. The front line forms a testudo, the tortoise formation so dense that men could literally walk across the shields. From a distance, Delta has the advantage. A 5.56mm round fired at 1,600 feet will absolutely smash through a Roman shield. Zero question about that. But Delta Force is looking at a formation that's roughly 500 feet wide and 30 ranks deep. Every shot counts, but even in a best-case scenario, hundreds of Romans will survive. Delta's firepower creates chaos, but Rome's doctrine is patience, attrition, and closing the gap. The physics work for Delta, the math works for Rome. This is where it gets ugly for Delta. The U.S. Army's own field manuals cite a sustained rate of fire around 12 to 15 rounds per minute for a rifleman, roughly one aimed shot every 4 to 5 seconds. Each operator burns through a standard 210-round loadout in somewhere between 14 and 16 minutes. But these guys don't have to be picky about their targets. This is the most target-rich environment they'll ever see. All they have to do is grip it and rip it and let their lead do the talking. In that window, Delta's gonna do some serious damage. Most shots will find a target. Some rounds catch the curved face of a scutum and deflect. But most of the time, the round wins. And that means a few thousand casualties before Delta goes dry. It sounds catastrophic up until you remember that Rome brought 5,000 men. Even in a best-case John Wick-type scenario, where every single round finds either the enemy's head or center mass, there's gonna be a couple hundred Roman soldiers still standing. Delta's bullets won't end the fight alone. Grenades might help. Throw a frag into a tight Roman formation and it can kill several, wound more, and create the type of chaos that formation is designed to prevent. 16 operators carrying 2 frags each could elicit a few hundred more casualties, but that only narrows the gap if Delta has already managed thousands of headshots before the enemy closes in. Delta Force has, at the absolute best, somewhere between 15 and 25 minutes to end this fight before it becomes something very different. The smart play for Delta is not to fight Rome's battle, so how would they do that? Scenario 3. The open terrain on a hot, sunny day is Rome's home turf. They've been winning there for centuries, so Delta picks the terrain instead. A mountain pass, a bridge, a canyon, anywhere that forces Rome to compress that massive formation into single file. It's like turning the world's most fearsome military machine into a very, very long, confident conga line. In a choke point, Rome's mass advantage disappears. A narrow canyon can only fit in so many men abreast. Suddenly, Delta doesn't have to cover an entire field. They're covering the topological equivalent of a doorway. Every round adds friction. Every casualty slows down the testudo's inertia. Here, the squad's automatic weapon operator, who in open terrain would just be one gun against a wall of humanity, becomes something else entirely. He's a deadly bottleneck, and the Romans have no choice but to charge head-on. The Romans aren't stupid, though, and this is important. A Roman legionnaire looking at a narrow pass is immediately thinking about what is on the other side and how to get around it. Flanking maneuvers, alternative routes, splitting the force, it all comes into play. Rome didn't build an empire by walking into obvious traps. But finding an alternative route takes time, and while part of the legion circles around, Delta melts the force at the front. It's the closest thing to a Delta win condition in a direct engagement. The choke point doesn't render them invincible, it just makes the butcher's bill for Rome significantly larger. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because where else can you watch Delta Force versus Romans and still learn something? Let's face it, the History Channel isn't gonna do this. Let's forget the choke point. Forget holding ground at all. What if Delta Force simply refuses to be where the Roman legion expects them to be? Scenario 4. This is much closer to what Delta Force actually does for a living. Strike fast, inflict damage, and disappear before the enemy can mount a response. 16 operators who won't stand still are a fundamentally different problem. They can hit the rear of the column and then relocate. They're never in the same place long enough to be surrounded, and never close enough to be caught. It's more of an annoying infestation than a battle. But the Romans are just as good at quelling insurgencies as any Delta Force veteran of the global war on terror. Sure, the testudo formation is absolutely useless here, but this is where cavalry could become a real issue for Delta. Roman cavalry at full gallop covers ground fast, and an ordinary legion has 300 of them. An operator who's just finished a firing action and is moving on foot is not outrunning a horse. No amount of training changes that. In open terrain, the cavalry turns Delta's mobility campaign into a pursuit problem, and Rome is historically excellent at those. But in a dense forest, rocky slopes, terrain where horses are more of a liability than an asset, whole different story. Delta can stay in the trees indefinitely, picking away at the legion every time it moves. Rome can't fix on them, they can't mass against them. The formations that make the legion nearly unbeatable in an open field are just expensive furniture in a forest. But what happens when the sun goes down? Who does the battle favor then? Scenario 5. Nightfall is what Rome fears. Every Delta Force operative carries night vision equipment. This means that in total darkness, an operator can see clearly, move confidently, and shoot accurately. A Roman legionnaire on a moonless night can see about as far as his torch reaches, maybe 33 feet. That's it. Beyond the firelight, they've got the moon, their wits, and little else for comfort. A night raid on a Roman camp flips almost every advantage Rome has. Campfires, which the Romans need for warmth and organization, actually work against them. They backlight the soldiers standing near them, making them easy targets for anyone with night vision. All the while, Delta stays completely invisible. Suppressed weapons don't make the noise that wakes up a camp. A sentry goes down quietly, and nobody knows why, and then another. And then by the time the camp figures out it's under attack, the attackers are already well inside the perimeter. The psychological effect of that is hard to overstate. Rome trained for enemies you can see, weapons you can hear, threats that have a direction you can face. Soldiers dying in the dark with no visible cause and no enemy to charge toward is not a military problem Rome has a solution for. That's the makings of a full-blown horror movie. At night, Rome has no answers for Delta Force. If the operators had the time to plan, they could do far more damage in an all-out night assault. These guys conducted target eliminations for a living. They could just as easily wage a methodical decapitation strike on the legion's entire leadership chain with no questions asked. Picture the legion's legatus legionis, the commanding general, being killed at close range, his tent infiltrated by a lone operator. Then the primus pilus, the most experienced combat officer in the legion, follows him into the afterlife. Centurions killed off one by one, all in the dark. By morning, the legion will wake up entirely leaderless with no explanation. And here is where Roman superstition finishes the job. Roman armies could cease operations altogether because scared chickens refused to eat before an engagement. It was an omen so serious that ignoring it was considered courting divine punishment. Compared to that, an entire leadership cadre vanishing silently overnight would be tantamount to a strongly worded letter from Jupiter. If Delta could make 5,000 men theologically convinced that continuing this fight is a bad idea, they might actually stand a chance. Why not throw in one more scenario for good measure? What happens when we drop Delta Force into the place Rome is most proud of, an ancient city? Bonus round. Dense streets, narrow alleys, buildings packed so tight you can touch both walls with your arms out, blind corners every 33 feet, rooftops everywhere. This erases Delta's biggest advantage, their range. It hands Rome something it's always excelled at, controlling ground it knows better than the enemy. Delta's rifles go from surgical long-range tools to somewhat awkward, loud boomsticks in the urban jungle. Engagements collapse to matters of feet. At that distance, a gladius in a trained hand isn't far behind a rifle. Roman soldiers were drilled with that blade every day since they were teenagers. Delta's body armor prioritizes mobility over coverage, leaving limbs and lower body exposed. A Roman legionnaire traversing a narrow alley in Lorica Segmentata, standard Roman armor, is actually better protected than he looks. Rome fights on home soil. Every alleyway, courtyard, and rooftop is familiar. Delta is navigating blind, which is how ambushes happen. And not the kind that Delta sets, the kind Delta rarely walks into. The night vision still helps, but everything else that makes Delta dangerous gets neutralized block by block. It looks like 16 very well-armed tourists took a wrong turn in the worst city on Earth. If you were a Roman general and somehow you understood what you were dealing with, your entire strategy might well be to retreat into the city and then make them follow you. The rifles still kill, the bodies still pile up in the doorways, but ammo runs down. Eventually, the last operators barricaded in whatever building they've turned into a last stand position and burned through their last magazine. Meanwhile, the Romans just keep on coming. The verdict. So where does that leave us? In a straight daylight field battle, Rome wins even in the most statistically unlikely scenario where every Delta has their accuracy slider turned up to 100. Delta does incredible damage on the way out, more casualties in less time than Rome has probably ever absorbed from a force this small. But when the ammo runs dry, there are still Romans standing. 16 men with knives can't change the outcome of the hand-to-hand melee that happens next. In the mobility campaign, it's a painful draw. Delta can keep going in the right terrain, but that's not really a win, is it? And Rome, a civilization that's more than willing to hunker down in a siege and wait out the enemy, is not going to blink first. At night, a decapitation strike on the Legion's leadership would be Delta's best strategy. Full stop. In the city, there is only so many places to hide before the Legion comes to collect Caesar's taxes. Modern weapons dominate skirmishes, but ancient systems dominate centuries. So what if a single modern Navy SEAL platoon fought an entire Roman legion? Click here to find out, or watch this video instead.